Okay, I'm going to get started this evening by welcoming everyone. Welcome to Watang Yu. Welcome to everyone who's joining online as well. Today is our group learning program where I start off with meditation, and then afterwards I'm going to share a talk with you guys on the teachings of the Buddha. Each Sunday I go chapter by chapter in this book, Developing a Life Practice, The Path That Leads to Enlightenment. Tonight we're in chapter 19, which is titled The Difficult Human Existence, Sickness, Aging, and Death. This is where you learn about the life story of the Buddha. In these challenging times in your life of sickness, aging, and death, you might really struggle with your own sickness, aging, and death, or as the people around you are having sickness, aging, and death, this can be a real challenge for you. So the Buddha figured out why this is and how to actually solve it. So we're going to do meditation first, and then afterwards I'll share details with you on the life story of the Buddha and what motivated him to go on this journey to actually experience enlightenment. So if you'd like to join for meditation, the way that we start is with some chanting to be able to ease the mind into meditation and get more benefit out of the meditation itself. You're welcome to chant along if you like. Then I'm going to come in with some guidance. Then there'll be a period of time of quietness where we're all meditating together. Then we'll come out of that with some more chanting. And then that's where I'll start today's class. So take whatever position is comfortable for you, and then I'll come back in with the guidance after the chanting. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Mahakawa Bhutang Mahakavanang Apivateyami Savakato Mahakavata Tammo Dhammang namasami Supatipano Mahakavato Savaka Sangho Sanghang namami Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Iti piso Mahakava Arahang Samma Sambuddho Vichacharanang sammuno Sakato rokavitu Anutero purisa Dhamma sati satatawa manusrang Bhutto Bhagavati. Okay, with the lower body and hands and arms comfortable, in the upper body erect, just close the eyes and start breathing in through the nose and out through the nose. Here you're just looking to establish the breath, a nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. Not forced or controlled, just a gradual inhale through the nose, experiencing the full breath. And then whenever you're ready, exhale out through the nose. Breathing in and out. Breathing in Your breath may not match up with the guidance that I'm providing, and that's okay. This is your practice. I'm just here for guidance. You can use this voice as a reminder that whenever you get to the next inhale, breathing gradually through the nose, developing a nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. And then whenever you're ready, exhale out through the nose, experiencing the full breath. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. With the breath well established, start fixating the mind on the breath, either the sound of the breath coming into the nose or the sensation of air moving over the skin into the nose. The breath is the present moment. Fixate the mind on the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. With the mind fixated on the breath, whenever you notice that it moves off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. No need to observe the thought, label it, judge it, analyze it, or even try to figure out where it's coming from. Whenever you notice that the mind is moved off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. I'm going to be quiet now and let you do this work of focusing on the breath, cutting off and letting go anytime the mind moves off the breath. You have nowhere to go. There's nothing to do. No one needs you right now. This is your time to focus on the breath. Breathing in and out. อะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธมาเกวาโพตังมาเกวันนังอภิวาเตมิสวากขาโตมาเกวัตตาธัมโมธัมมังนามัสสามิสุปฏิปันโนมหะเขวะโตสาวกสังโฆสังฆังนามามินะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะอิติปิโสมะเขวะอะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธวิจาจารณังสัมมุโนสกาโตโรกาวิตุอนุเตโรปุริสาดามาสติสัตตาตวามนุสรังพุทโธภาควาติ Okay, if you guys would like to slowly make your way out of meditation. Okay, once again, I would like to welcome all of you guys here at the temple and everyone joining online as well. This individual who we refer to as the Buddha was born over 2,500 years ago, and he taught how to get to this enlightened mental state. What enlightenment is where the mind's completely peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy. By the time you get to enlightenment, you don't experience any discontent feelings. All the anger, sadness, frustration, irritation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, stress, anxiety, loneliness, boredom, shyness, resentment, jealousy, all of that is eliminated from the mind through training of the mind. This individual that went on this journey to enlightenment, he actually started his life out as in a royal family. And I'm going to share with you his life story today. This is part of chapter 19 of our book, which is titled The Difficult Human Existence, Sickness, Aging, and Death. And sometimes when people know that I put his life story in chapter 19, they sometimes ask me, they say, why did you wait all the way to chapter 19 to put the life story of the Buddha? Shouldn't that have been up front? Well, the reason why I put it in chapter 19 is because during his lifetime, he was asked by his students what would be the best way to respect him. And when he was asked this question, he said, the best way to respect me is to learn and practice the teachings. If you learn and practice the teachings, that's the best way to respect me. So knowing this about the Buddha, I decided to put his teachings in the front part of the book. And of course, the entire book has his teachings, but I know that his life story is important for you to understand because it's going to help you to understand his journey to enlightenment. And there's certain lessons that you can learn as part of that. But what's really important is to get you started on the path so that you can understand the teachings and start actually training your mind. So that's why I put it at the chapter 19 rather than in the front of the book. So I titled this chapter The Difficult Human Existence, Sickness, Aging, and Death, because in the unenlightened state, life can actually seem very difficult. when your mind is struggling, when you're having stress and anxiety, frustration, when people close to you are experiencing sickness, aging, and death, or your own sickness, aging, and death, this can be a real challenge for you during your life. These were motivators for the Buddha to be able to go on this journey, to be able to figure out how to get to enlightenment. So what I'm going to do is share with you his life story, but understand that by the time you get to enlightenment, life is no longer difficult, right? It's very seamless. You're living an ideal life. Your life is comfortable. You're not struggling and having difficulties anymore. But in the unenlightened state, it can be very difficult. And that's what motivated the Buddha to be able to go on this journey to get to enlightenment, is because he saw life to be so difficult. So this talk that I'm going to share with you guys about his life story, I'm going to share with you his birth, his early life, his journey to enlightenment in his teaching career. And then I'm going to circle back and explain to you sickness, aging, and death, and why people struggle with this so much in their life. Normally, when I'm teaching, I would teach for like 15, 20, 30 minutes and open up for questions, teach another 15, 20, 30 minutes and open up for questions. But for this particular topic, I found that it's better to just teach it all the way through and then open up for questions at the end. When we get to the point of questions, if you're here at the temple and you have a question, we have microphones in the white bowl there. We have a white bowl up here with microphones. Just get a microphone and press the gray button. You can have this at your seat, and we'll be able to hear you here at the temple, and they'll be able to hear you online as well. If you speak here without a microphone, they won't be able to hear you online. And then for all of you that are online, you can ask your questions by putting that into the comment section of Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Or in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand, unmute your microphone, and ask any and all questions that you like. So the individual who we refer to as the Buddha, he started life out as Siddhartha Gotama. This was his given name. He was born into a royal family. His mother was a queen married to the king, and he was the firstborn son. And this was in 563 BCE. He was born in Nepal, what we refer to as Nepal. It wasn't referred to as Nepal back then, but that's the region of the world that he was actually born into. So during this period of time, if you were pregnant as a woman and you were going to give birth, they would actually take you back to your homeland where it is that you grew up so that you could be around your family to be able to give birth. So you'd have your parents, your siblings, your aunts and uncles, and people like this to be able to help you during the childbirth, but afterwards as well to be able to take care of the baby. So the king organized a caravan to be able to take his wife back to her homeland. And she was traveling back to her homeland, and she actually went into labor pains. So they stopped the caravan, and she gets out, and she goes over to this tree. She's holding on to the branch of this tree, trying to deliver the baby, and is having trouble coming out of the normal birthing canal. So that's why she was standing up trying to deliver the baby. Eventually, the baby comes through the side of her stomach, and because of this, she ends up dying 7 days later. Where today we have medical technology, we would have just done a C-section and she would have been just fine. But 2,500 years ago, they didn't have that technology. So it wasn't uncommon for a woman and or the child to actually die during childbirth 2,500 years ago. So they had protocols in place for this, that if you died as a female and your children lived, that your brothers and sisters would adopt your children as their own. So Siddhartha Gautama's mother had an older sister who actually adopted him as her own child. So his aunt became his stepmother. So at this time of his birth, it's said in the original text that there's a miracle that happened. I don't actually think that this is true, but I'll explain it to you because this is what you'll see if you read the original text about the life story of the Buddha. And then I'll explain to you why I don't think it's true. It's said that when he was born, he walked right away as soon as he came out from his mom's stomach, that there were lotus flowers that were blossoming under his feet, and he took 7 steps, and there was these 7 lotus flowers that blossomed under his feet. And then he spoke and he said, "This will be my last birth." Okay, if this is actually true, the next part of the story wouldn't be needed. So I'll tell you this next part of the story, but you'll see that it wouldn't be needed if this part of the story was actually true. So the next part of the story is that his father, being the king, was interested to know what his son was going to become. So he summons these fortune tellers, these advisors, to come and let him know what his son was going to become. Well, if your son is walking and talking and lotus flowers are blossoming under their feet at birth, you don't need any fortune tellers or advisors to tell you what this boy is going to become. You know this person's pretty special, right? So I don't think this is actually true, because what happens is when there's someone as significant as a Buddha that lives in the world, they do something very significant, which is he brought these teachings into the world in a way that people can actually get to enlightenment. And oftentimes when the stories are handed down from generation to generation, they're embellished because they're trying to make the person look even better than they already were. He was already doing amazing things. There's no need to embellish the life story of a Buddha. But nonetheless, I think that's what they did, because this next part of the story wouldn't be needed if this part of the story was true. So nonetheless, there was these 108 advisors that came to advise his father of what his son was going to become. This was a common practice at the time. So 107 advisors shared with the king that his son was going to be a great monarch, a great ruler. He was going to expand his territory far and wide and expand his kingdom. And of course, the father's like, that's my boy. Okay, yeah, let's go, right? Well, there's this one advisor who comes in and says, "Sir, I'm so sorry. I heard those other advisors and they're 100% accurate. Your son is going to be a great leader, but he's not going to be a monarch. He's not going to be a ruler. He's going to be a spiritual leader." And his father didn't like this. So he decides to sequester him into the palace, not allowing him to go out and get involved in worldly affairs. He thought that if he went outside the palace, that he would get involved in worldly affairs and he would be interested in being a spiritual leader. So he decides to keep him in the palace and try to kind of get him hooked to this lifestyle of being a monarch and a ruler. So he lavishes him with gift after gift after gift of everything you think that a royal father could give, a rich royal father could give their son. He gave it to Siddhartha Gotama. He gave him beautiful fabrics to wear, nice fabrics on his body. He gave him amazing food to be able to eat. He had beautiful women bathing him and taking care of him. He had really wonderful entertainment to be able to entertain him. And this was all to try to get him hooked to this lifestyle of being a king, because he thought that if he could get him hooked to this lifestyle of being a king, he would never leave it to go do something else, like be a spiritual leader, because he wouldn't be able to have this particular lifestyle. So at the age of 29, after having been lavished in this lifestyle for 29 years, he decides he's going to go outside the palace into the kingdom to be able to see what the kingdom is like, because he was about to become the king. At this time frame, you would become the king at the age of 30, and your dad would retire, and then they would be right alongside of you to be able to teach you how to be a better and better king. So at the age of 29, he knew that he was about to become the king, but he'd never even been outside in the kingdom. So he decides to go outside into the kingdom against his father's knowledge, and without his support, he actually went out into the kingdom, and he went out there with his royal attendant, kind of like his chief of staff. And he goes out into the kingdom and he has what's called the 4 observations. What he observed is a sickly person, an aging person, a dead corpse, and a roaming ascetic, somebody who's kind of given up worldly life to be able to understand this path to enlightenment. And when he has these 4 observations, it's really impactful to his mind. When he sees the sickly person, he sees this disgruntledness and this frustration around this person. And he needs to turn to his royal attendant and ask what's going on over there. And he's like, oh, that person, they're sick and they're not going to be able to provide for their family. They're not going to be able to get the basic necessities to sustain their life very easily. And this was very impactful to Siddhartha Gautama, because he lived this life of luxury. If you lived in a royal palace for 29 years and that's all you've ever known, you probably think that everybody grows up that way. So when he went out into the kingdom and he saw people struggling and having difficulties, this was very impactful to his mind. Then he sees an aging person, and this aging person was kind of getting older and decrepit. They were also having difficulties getting along in life, and there was this disgruntledness around this person. And he had to ask his royal attendant, like, what's going on over there? And it's the same story. The royal attendant was like, this person is not going to be able to get necessities to be able to sustain their life. And there's this disgruntledness. And then he sees this dead corpse and people grieving and being sorrowful. And it was the same story there too, that this person was a main provider to the family, and they weren't going to be able to help the family to be able to provide what they need to be able to sustain their life. And there was this grief and sorrow and sadness. So Siddhartha Gautama starts looking at the kingdom as being miserable and full of misery. And then he actually sees this person off meditating, And he didn't understand what that was. And he needed to ask his royal attendant, like, what's that person doing over there? And he said, oh, that person's trying to figure out all this other stuff. They're trying to figure out why we experience sickness, aging, and death, and how to eliminate this frustration and agitation that the mind's experiencing during this period of time. So he decides that's what he's interested in doing, that he's not interested in ruling over misery and despair. He was interested in helping people to escape out of this. So he decides he's going to leave the royal palace and go on this journey to be able to figure out how to get to enlightenment. And when he's at this time frame in his life, he's married. He has a wife and he has a young infant son. And he goes back to the palace and they're actually sleeping. And he didn't understand his mind as much as he would by the time he got to enlightenment, but he understood his mind enough that he felt like if he said goodbye, it would be too difficult for him to do that. So he just kind of looks in on them as they're sleeping and he leaves in the middle of the night. He takes with him his favorite horse and his royal attendant. And he leaves on this journey and he goes and travels away from the palace. And eventually he gets to a point where he lets his horse go, he lets his royal attendant go, and he cuts off his hair. At this point, he has this long, beautiful, flowing hair. This is how they knew you were a member of the royal family, because an average common person, they worked in the fields, they worked in different labor jobs, their hair would get all tangled and knotted up. They wouldn't be able to have this long, beautiful, flowing hair. But a member of the royal family, they had servants to be able to shampoo their hair, to brush their hair, to comb their hair, to detangle their hair. So if you went out into the kingdom and you had this long, beautiful, flowing hair, they knew you were a member of the royal family. Where today, we just put the picture of the king and the queen all over the kingdom, or we put it on our money, and now we know who's the king and the queen because we see their picture. But they didn't have that technology back then. So that's why they would grow their hair very long so that people would know who was a member of the royal family. So by cutting off his hair, after having grown this for 29 years, it's basically like, I'm never going back, right? I'm not going back to assume the throne, because nobody would ever think that he was a member of the royal family having gone back with his hair cut off. So he ends up taking up training with two teachers. These two teachers, he trains with the first one for about a year. And this teacher had claimed that he knew how to get to enlightenment. So this teacher was teaching him to hang himself upside down from trees, to lay on beds of nails, to pierce his body with metal implements, to starve his body. What the thought was is that if you could cause physical pain to the body and your mind could overcome that pain, that you would actually get to enlightenment. So he does this for an entire year. And at the end of this year, the teacher comes to him and says, you've learned everything that I have to teach you. There's nothing else for me to teach you. And Siddhartha Gautama realized his mind wasn't any more peaceful than it was when he was in the palace. So he knew he hadn't gotten to enlightenment, and he decides to leave from that teacher. And he goes and studies with another teacher. He studies with this teacher also for a year. Essentially the same things, though. Hanging themselves upside down from trees, laying on beds of nails, piercing his body with metal implements, starving himself. And at the end of this year, the teacher comes to him and says, you've learned everything I have to share. There's nothing else for me to teach you. You've mastered everything. And he was frustrated with the whole thing because he knew his mind wasn't enlightened, because his mind wasn't experiencing the peace and joy of the enlightened mental state. So he decides to go off on his own into the forest and start training his own mind. But the only things that he knows how to do is what these teachers taught him. So he was continuing to do those kinds of things. And he took this so far that he was only eating 1 grain of rice per day. That's what he was sustaining himself on. And he was on the edge of the forest. He was meditating, and he was essentially skin and bones, essentially on death's doorstep. And there's this mother and this young child that comes by, and they see him there. And they know that he's very close to death because they could see that his bones were protruding. He was just skin and bones. And they beg and plead with him to eat some rice. And he reluctantly accepts this rice because he thinks that he's given up on the path to enlightenment by accepting this rice and choosing to eat this meal. But as he's eating this meal, he has this realization where he realizes that he's been in these two extremes, that when he was in the royal palace, he was living this life of sensual pleasures where he had everything and anything that you could imagine. But then when he left and he went out on his own to be able to train his mind with these teachers and then by himself, he was only eating 1 grain of rice per day. So he was in these two extremes, and he knew that both of these extremes don't actually lead to enlightenment. So he decides to start practicing what's called the middle way. This is what he ultimately describes it as, is the middle way, where he starts doing things in moderation, and he starts eating. He starts realizing that if he allows this body to die, that he wouldn't be able to train the mind. So he starts to eat. And for the next 4 years, his practice really excels, where he ultimately gets to enlightenment, and he figures out how to do this by himself. Then, as he got to enlightenment, he realizes that his teachings were very different than anybody else at the time, because they were disparaging their body. They were causing pain to the physical body. All of his teachings had to do with training the mind. So when he got to enlightenment, he was interested in sharing these teachings with other people, but he didn't think that the world was ready to be able to hear his teachings, because they were doing things so vastly different than what it is that he actually had figured out. So he kind of hangs out at this tree for a while, and he just kind of hangs out there for about 7 weeks, contemplating of whether or not he should go back to the palace or whether he should share his teachings. So ultimately he decides that he's going to share his teachings, and he goes back to the place where he was studying with those first 2 teachers. And when he travels back to that place, he encounters 4 of his previous classmates and 1 of his previous teachers. And when he sees these 5 people, they start joking him and laughing and mocking him, because they actually saw that he looked healthy, that he had meat on his bones, and he was cheerful and bright and glad and uplifted. And they thought that he had actually given up on the path to enlightenment, because to them, in order to get to enlightenment, you had to be disparaging the physical body. He should have been, skin and bones, but instead he looked healthy and he had meat on his bones and he was cheerful. So they start laughing at him and joking him and mocking him. But by the time you get to enlightenment, that stuff doesn't bother you. In the unenlightened state, if somebody did that to you, you would probably experience discontentedness, but it's actually your own mind that's causing that. But by the time you get to enlightenment, you won't be affected by that. So the Buddha, realizing what was going on, he just comes over to where they're at. He sits down on the ground and he takes his hand and he touches the earth. And when he touches the earth, he performs the one and only miracle that he actually ever performed. Because a Buddha doesn't perform countless miracles. They only perform one miracle at the beginning of their teaching in order to be able to kind of help an initial group of people to understand that they're a Buddha. So what happened when he touched the earth is that all these animals came to where he was at. There was deer and squirrels and rabbits and lizards and birds and all these other animals that came to where he was at. And when these 5 people saw that all of these animals rushed to where he was at, they decided to sit down and listen. Right? You probably would too. If you were there, it's like, okay, what do you have to say? So he delivers his very first teaching, which is called the 4 Noble Truths. In 4 simple statements, he explained what is the problem in the mind, the cause of that problem, the elimination of it, and the path forward, helping his students to be able to understand what was causing their discontentedness. And because a Buddha's teachings are independently verifiable, they were able to see that he had actually attained enlightenment because he had figured it out. So from that point forward, there's more and more and more and more students that started to learn with him. And from the age of 35 to the age of 80, for 45 years, he teaches countless people, and countless people get to enlightenment. He dies at the age of 80 from old age, and shortly thereafter, they start documenting his teachings so that more people can get to enlightenment after his death. This is the 3 criteria of what makes a Buddha, is that they get to enlightenment by themselves without the help of any teachers or any guides. They then dedicate the rest of their life to sharing their independently discovered teachings with countless people, and countless people will get to enlightenment during that person's lifetime. They will then preserve their teachings in such a way that countless more people will get to enlightenment after their death. So this type of individual is very rare in the world. The last one that the world's currently aware of existed over 2,500 years ago. So you will hear some people tell you that everybody is a Buddha. This isn't actually true. The Buddha never taught this. He explained how rare it is for somebody to actually be a Buddha, because these 3 criteria only happen in the world in very rare circumstances. So we refer to this type of person as a fully, perfectly enlightened one, because having gotten to enlightenment by themselves without the help of any teachers or any guides, their mind is fully, perfectly enlightened. They don't have any extra baggage kind of in the corners anywhere. They've fully transformed their mind. And now they illuminate that path for everybody else to be able to see how to be able to get to enlightenment. Because if you learn from a teacher who maybe didn't learn from a Buddha, or if you learn from a teacher who's not a Buddha, you might actually get to enlightenment through that process, but there might be some little things here and there that you're doing that didn't actually lead or contribute to your enlightenment, but you still do those things regardless, like a meditation. There might be a certain meditation that you do, but it didn't actually lead to your enlightenment. But by the time an individual gets to enlightenment by themselves, they actually know the pure path to enlightenment. Because a individual who's going to become a Buddha, if they're doing a certain meditation and it's not working to improve the condition of their mind, they will discard it. But if they're using a certain meditation and they can see that it's working to improve their mind, then they know that that's the path to enlightenment. And then they share that with other people throughout their entire life. And they make sure their teachings are preserved so that other people can get to enlightenment after their death. So this individual who we refer to as the Buddha, this is his life story. And we can see that he got to enlightenment through learning and investigating his teachings now. If you learn and investigate his teachings, you can learn them intellectually. You can reflect on them to verify whether they're true or they're false, and then you can practice his teachings. And as you integrate his teachings into your life, the condition of your mind in your life gradually improves. And this is how you can know what the teachings are and that this individual was indeed a Buddha, because now 2,500 years later, you're actually experiencing improvement and progress to the condition of your mind in your life based on studying his teachings. There's countless lessons here that you can learn from his life story, but let's just start with these. Sickness, aging, and death. What he ultimately discovers is that the reason why people experience struggles through sickness is that they're craving permanent health. That if you want this body to be permanently healthy, when you're experiencing sickness, you'll be frustrated or agitated or annoyed because the mind's not getting what it wants and what it expects. The mind in the unenlightened state craves permanence while you live in an impermanent world. Things are constantly changing. So if this body is sick and you're frustrated or agitated or annoyed because of being sick, that's because your mind is craving this permanent health where this body can't be permanently healthy. And then sometimes people even crave certain activities. They really want to go bike riding, or they want to go spend time with their friends, or they want to go see their coworkers at work. And now they're at home being sick and they're disgruntled and frustrated because their mind's not getting what it wants, which is to be outside playing. So if the mind's craving permanent health and you get health, you'll be happy and excited about that because the mind's getting what it wants. But when you don't get what you want, the mind experiences frustration or agitation or annoyance. And because the world is impermanent, you can't always get what you want. The same thing is true about aging, that if you crave permanent youthfulness, and you look in the mirror and you see a wrinkle or a gray hair, or you notice that you're starting to lose your hair, or you're starting to get a little bit of extra, baggage right here, or maybe a whole lot of extra, right? Now you might be frustrated or disgruntled because you're experiencing this change with the physical body, where the mind is craving this permanent youthfulness. Or with death, either your own death or the death of the people around you. If you're grieving during that period of time, it's because the mind is craving permanent life. The mind can only be happy when it's getting what it wants in the unenlightened state. So if grandma and grandpa are alive, the mind is happy and excited about that. But when it experiences this impermanence, the mind doesn't like that. So one of the ways to say this is that the mind craves permanence, but another way to say this is that the unenlightened mind does not like impermanence. It doesn't like change. When things are changing, the unenlightened mind doesn't like this. This is why if you look at your life, when you were experiencing change with your living location, with your job or occupation, or your relationships were changing, that's where you experience the most difficulties and struggles in your life, because the mind doesn't like that change. So this is what the Buddha figured out, is that the mind craves permanence while everything in the world around you is actually impermanent. So you can train your mind to understand this and train it to let go. So this sickness, aging, and death were the motivators that motivated Siddhartha Gotama off on this journey to be able to figure out how to get to enlightenment. And we can also see through his journey to enlightenment that causing physical pain to the body doesn't actually help you get to enlightenment. Because sometimes even nowadays, when you go to places to train your mind, like retreats and stuff like this, well-established places, if you say, hey, teacher, I feel this pain in my knee, or I feel this pain in my hip, what am I supposed to do? Sometimes they'll say, just breathe through it, just breathe through the pain. This is very unwise. The Buddha shows us that. It's not about causing physical pain to the body, because if you're sitting there and all you experience is pain, 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 you can't actually train your mind. So that's why the Buddha taught 4 meditation positions, so that if you notice that you have physical pain, you can just switch to a different position and you don't need to experience that physical pain, because that's a signal to your mind that, hey, something's wrong here, that there's some structure in your knee or in your hip that isn't feeling well. And if you just sit there, it's just damaging the physical body. And this is unwise. So we can learn these types of things through the journey of the life story of the Buddha. The Buddha left his family for a period of time to be able to train his mind for 6 years, but he ultimately comes back to his family and actually spends time with them. His wife ordains with him, his stepmother, who was his aunt, ordains with him, his son ordains with him. Many, many people come to actually ordain with him. And these people were actually getting to enlightenment. Sometimes people think that the Buddha left his family and he never came back. This isn't actually true. You can see it in the documentation of his teachings that he did come back to those people, and they actually ended up learning with him and actually getting to enlightenment. So this is the Buddha's life story about how he got to enlightenment. But that doesn't mean that you need to replicate that. You don't need to leave your family for 6 years in order to be able to get to enlightenment. That's what he chose to do, and that's part of his training. And he did this as what we would consider today as an ordained practitioner. But you can get to enlightenment as an ordained practitioner, but also as an unordained practitioner too. You can, as a household practitioner, still get to enlightenment, living in a household life. But you're going to need to seek out the understanding of the teachings to be able to train your mind to experience this enlightened mental state. So I'm going to pause here and see what questions you guys might have about his life story. Remember, here you guys can use the mics. And then those of you guys online, you can put this into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions you like by unmuting your microphone. So are there any questions here? Anybody online that would like to ask a question? Let me see if we have anything here online. Okay, you have a question? Yeah, you guys go ahead, go for it.
It is said that today we live like Buddha as a prince, that we have everything. And I'm wondering if being exposed to suffering of other beings can help us advance in our spiritual journey.
It really depends. In order to get to enlightenment, what you need to be able to do is cultivate wisdom. That's the ultimate discovery that the Buddha made. While he explains that it's craving, desire, attachment that leads to discontentedness, that's the ultimate cause of discontentedness. The whole reason why the mind continues to have craving, which produces anger, is because the mind lacks wisdom. So if an individual was motivated by seeing other people suffer, sure, it could help them. But at the end of the day, they still need to cultivate wisdom. Just seeing people suffering isn't going to lead to your enlightenment. You need to actually cultivate wisdom. So that's what the Buddha was doing during that 6-year period. So while it was seeing the suffering of others that he was like, oh my gosh, this world is in such despair, I need to go figure out how to help these people. That was the initial motivator that motivated him to go do it. But then while he was actually doing the work for 6 years, he needed to cultivate wisdom and train his mind. That's what actually is going to lead to your enlightenment. So everybody's going to be different of what motivates them. Some people get motivated because maybe they're in a relationship and the relationship's not going very well and they would like to experience something better, or maybe their job's not going well, or maybe they've had a death in the family. Different people are motivated for different reasons. People might have had multiple breakups and broken relationships, and they're kind of tired and frustrated of all this discontentedness and the misery that they experience, let alone what other people experience. They're just looking to get out of their own misery. So everybody's motivated for different reasons, but at the end of the day, you need to be motivated, because the unenlightened mind will oftentimes have deep complacency, where it'll be dull and lethargic and lacking vigor and vitality and willingness to do something. And it'll lack initiative to be able to go actually gain the wisdom that it needs to be able to train the mind. So you got to break through that complacency complacency somehow. And for the Buddha, it was seeing the suffering of other people. So each person is going to be different of what motivates them on this path. But then ultimately, what's on the path is going to be the same in terms of they need to cultivate the wisdom to be able to train the mind. You have a question?
So the thing with pain, should the enlightened mind be able to sit through the pain, like in meditating, maybe a cramp or something?
If you experience just a cramp, the enlightened mind can experience that without any discontentedness, but you don't have to experience that in order to be able to get to enlightenment, because physical pain is just an indication that something in the body is off. And it would be unwise to continue to allow that to occur. So, for example, if you are standing really close to a fire and you notice the heat coming on your body, you don't have to stand there in order to be able to experience anything. Instead, that pain is there to be an indication to the mind that you're too close to the fire. And now you actually step away. So as an unenlightened being, if you're standing too close to a fire and you experience that pain, you might be like, oh my gosh, it's so hot. You might be frustrated and angry, right? As an enlightened being, when you experience that heat, it's like, that's heat. Let me move. Right? You're going to maintain your calmness and composure. But the heat itself and the physical pain on the body isn't doing anything to produce enlightenment in the mind, because the ultimate goal is to cultivate wisdom. So if somebody's teaching to just breathe through the pain or experience the pain, this is really unwise, because that pain is an indicator to you that something with the body is not well, and you need to use the mind to make wise decisions to get the body to a safe place, whether that's moving away from a fire or stretching your leg or stretching your hip or whatever it is. So that's why the Buddha has these 4 positions, because in the seated position, sometimes there can be knee pain, ankle pain, hip pain, back pain, and this is why we have the lying position, to lie on the floor, to be able to rest and relax the muscles, or the standing position or the walking position. So if you're meditating and you're experiencing pain, just change positions. One thing I'll say about this while we're talking about pain as it relates to enlightenment is, in the unenlightened state, you'll experience certain pains, and you'll not only experience the physical pain, but you'll experience the mental anguish that goes along with it. It's like getting hit with 2 darts. You get hit with the first dart, which is the physical pain, but then because the mind craves permanent comfort of the body, and that's not what you're getting, the mind will experience mental anguish. So the physical pain will actually be heightened in the unenlightened state. But by the time you get to enlightenment, you'll still experience the physical pain, but you won't experience the mental anguish any longer. But you still use that physical pain as an indication to be able to make some corrective actions. So the physical pain in the enlightened mental state is very muted and very minimal compared to what you are experiencing in the unenlightened state. So you'll experience very minimal pain, but you need that pain, because even as an enlightened being, if you were standing too close to a fire, you need to know to move away from it. So this is some helpful things for you in regards to pain. Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, let me see if we have any questions online here. I don't see any questions online anywhere. Any more questions here?
Do you know the kingdom the Buddha was a prince to?
It's documented. I don't have it in my memory because it's not part of the path to enlightenment. But if you're interested in information, it's well documented. You can actually go visit it. I went this past year, 2025, 2026. I did a trip to be able to see all these different sites, and I know exactly where the kingdom is. You can actually go to the palace and all these different things. You can go to the birthplace, all these different places. There's 4 sites that the Buddha talked about that if you're interested in going to visit, you can go visit these, but there's actually many more sites than that you could actually visit. But he talked about the site where he's born, the site where he got to enlightenment, which is attributed to that tree, the site where he delivered his very first teaching, and the site where he died. These are all well preserved, but there's also many other sites that you can visit too, associated with the life of the Buddha. And one of them is the kingdom that his father actually was responsible for, and it's in Nepal. So if you go to his birthplace, because remember, they were traveling from the kingdom back to her homeland, so the birthplace is, I think it's about an hour and a half, 2 hours away from the actual kingdom today. Now, back then, how long it would have taken them to travel that distance, I'm not sure. Even that distance from where he got to enlightenment to where he delivered his first teaching, it took us about 7 or 8 hours by bus to be able to get there. So we were calculating it once we got there, and we figured out that at a very, 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 very minimum, it took the Buddha about 12 days to be able to walk from where he got to enlightenment to where he delivered his first teaching. And that would have been, him kind of like walking a significant amount of time each day. And we know that he stopped to eat and, do things like this along the way. But, he was traveling. He was moving around. It took us 12 days by bus, and we hit all these sites, and it was a very, large area that he had actually traveled and walked in. Yep. Yes, sir.
I can see that like while learning more and meditating more, I'm becoming like more wise, but the whole like idea of total enlightenment sometimes seems like a little too far, like kind of like a myth even, like, because I'm wondering like how many people reached enlightenment, and how do we know they did reach enlightenment?
Yep. The only reason why you would think that enlightenment is like a myth and it sounds too far-fetched is because your mind doesn't have the wisdom to understand what enlightenment is and how to actually attain it. But if you talk with someone who understands what enlightenment is and how to attain it, they can share with you that it's very realistic, that there's no reason why you can't get to enlightenment in this life. But the mind's going to constantly be trying to justify where you currently are in life, and it's going to try to avoid this work that you need to do. It's kind of like this mountain that you need to climb, and the mind's going to constantly be trying to tell you why you don't have to climb this mountain, and it's going to come up with all these excuses. You will know as you learn about what enlightenment is more and more how to identify people who are enlightened. That's not the ultimate goal of the path to enlightenment, is to figure out who is enlightened. Instead, it's for you to get to enlightenment. It's a self-help program. It's for you to do this inner work, inner growth, and inner development. But as part of that journey and understanding what enlightenment is, you'll know more and more how to be able to identify people who are enlightened and who aren't enlightened. One of the best ways to know when someone's not enlightened is that they'll get frustrated, they'll get angry, irritated, annoyed, they'll be having these discontent feelings. That's one of the best ways to know they're not enlightened. And you'll see that if you spend time with people. But if you spend time with people like a teacher or something like that who's teaching about enlightenment, you'll be able to see someone who's enlightened. Their teachings are very clear, very concise, and very precise. They can explain to you exactly how to get to enlightenment. That person won't be charging you any money to be able to help you to get to enlightenment. They would just be helping you out of the kindness of their heart. So there are certain things like this that you can be able to see. In this first book that I suggest people to start with, I don't know if you've gotten one of these yet. You can, as you know, download it from the website for free. You can take it and go print it yourself. You can get printed versions here by reimbursing us for the printing cost so that we can go purchase more books, or you can get it on Amazon. In chapter 3, in the very back of the chapter, I have about 8 different questions that you could ask someone to determine whether or not they're enlightened or not. But you don't go around just asking random people this type of thing. Instead, it's like a potential teacher, right? Because if you're going to learn with somebody, you would like to have confidence that they're either enlightened or very close to it. And then you're not believing that person. Instead, you're learning, examining, investigating what they teach. You're reflecting to verify if it's true or false. And then you're practicing their teachings to be able to integrate it into your life. And you'll see the condition of your mind gradually improving. So don't believe anybody, because if somebody tells you they're enlightened, that's the big indication that they're not enlightened, because an enlightened being is not going to go around and be bragging and boastful that they're enlightened. Instead, just listen to the person's teachings. Look at how they're teaching. Look at what it is that they're sharing. And then don't believe it. Learn it, reflect on it, and practice it to be able to verify it for yourself and integrate it into your life. And as you see the condition of your mind and your life improving, you'll know that those teachings are working. And as you spend time with the teacher, you should be able to see that their mind's focused, that it's concentrated, that they have clarity, they have memory, right? Because by the time you get to enlightenment, you actually can memorize the teachings. You actually know exactly how to get to enlightenment. Somebody without any visual aids, without any books or anything, they could sit down and they could explain to you. Of course, it's going to take many more than just one conversation, but they can easily answer any question that you ask them about the path to enlightenment. And you'd be able to see that their mind is very crisp and clear and sharp in the way that they talk, in the way that they, describe the teachings, in the way that they describe enlightenment. Sometimes you ask people, what is enlightenment? And they will say, oh, that's very difficult to explain. It's very hard. I wouldn't be able to explain it. Well, when you hear that, then you know that the person's not enlightened, because if somebody's enlightened, they would be able to explain it very clearly for you of what enlightenment is. So these are just some of the things that you can understand, but I know with 100% certainty that the Buddha's teachings lead to enlightenment, but you need to be able to know that for yourself. And the only way that you'll be able to know that is by learning and practicing the teachings. You're not going to be able to know that before practicing. You can't just sit back and try to decide whether or not you're going to put your foot in the water or not to go swimming. You've got to get wet. You've got to get into the water and roll up the sleeves and investigate the teachings. And that's how you're going to figure out that these teachings are indeed leading to enlightenment. I know that with 100% certainty. That's why I do what I do. But you need to be able to investigate the teachings so that you can know that. And then as you train your mind and you see the condition of your mind and your life improving, that's how you'll know that these teachings lead to enlightenment.
Yeah, what I mean is just I'll have to focus on the next day to be more compassionate and wise, and not in a very far away target.
That's the way you get to enlightenment, is you just focus one step at a time. It's like if you're at the bottom of the mountain, if you're unenlightened, you're looking at the top of the mountain, you don't focus on the top of the mountain. That's not how you get to the top of the mountain. You look at the foot right in front of you, right? You do one step at a time. And as you're making your way up this mountain, if you get tired, what do? If you're noticing you have soreness in your thighs and in your hips and your ankles are hurting, your feet are hurting, what do? You rest, right? You sit down, probably have some trail mix, have some water, right? Whatever it is that you've brought. And then after you rest, you go take some more walk up the mountain. The only difference in this analogy is that normally when you actually walk up a real mountain, you get to the top and it's a beautiful view, it's fresh air and all that good stuff. You really enjoy it, but then you've got to come back down, right? The difference here is that when you get to enlightenment, it's a permanent mental state, that your mind will always be in that mental state. You don't have to come back down the mountain. So as you're making your way on this journey, you'll maybe take like a 5-day course where you're learning deeply the teachings of the Buddha and you're digesting all of that, right? And there's a lot of work there to be able to learn all that. But then maybe you need to step away and take a little bit of a break and integrate those teachings into your life. And then you take the next step. Maybe you take another course or another retreat or something like that. A program like this that I teach on Sundays, it's just, like an hour and a half each Sunday. So it's very easy to kind of learn it and kind of integrate it into your life over a 7-month period. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but enlightenment is very attainable. Yeah. Okay. So one last thing to share with you guys, but before I finish class, is nobody ever said life would be easy, but it's also not supposed to be tough. Learning Gotama Buddha's teachings is not easy, but learning and practicing the teachings of the Buddha will ensure that life is not tough, right? Because in the unenlightened state, life can seem very difficult. There can be lots of struggles, right? So nobody ever said life would be easy, but it's not supposed to be tough. You can learn and practice and train your mind and cultivate wisdom to ensure that life is not tough. And it's the same thing with the teachings of the Buddha, that it's not easy to learn his teachings, but it's also not difficult either. But by learning and practicing his teachings, it will ensure that life is not tough. Because the only reason why life is difficult for people in the unenlightened state is because the mind just lacks wisdom. There's certain wisdom about this world that the mind doesn't understand. When we talk about awakening to enlightenment or to be awake, it means to cultivate wisdom about the natural laws. The mind in the unenlightened state lacks wisdom about the natural laws. So the mind experiences stress and anxiety and frustration and agitation because it's living in a world that it doesn't understand. But when your mind is awake, that means you've cultivated wisdom about the world around you, and now the mind is experiencing complete peace and joy. Because to live in a world that you don't understand is very difficult. It's a struggle, right? When you live in a world you don't understand, of course you'll have difficulties and struggles. But when your mind is awake to these natural laws that the Buddha taught, you don't struggle and have difficulties anymore. So these teachings aren't easy, but they're also not difficult either. And learning and practicing them will ensure that your life is not difficult. But the mind, like I mentioned, can oftentimes be complacent, and it'll look for reasons to say like, that's for other people, it's not for me, or I don't think I can do that, or I don't think that the Buddha really lived, or enlightenment's not possible, or any number of different things that the mind can come up with. So if you stay dedicated and you stay motivated and you learn the true teachings of the Buddha, I can assure you they lead exactly where he said they do, to this enlightened mental state. And you can see that for yourself through learning and practicing his teachings. So thank you guys here at the temple, and thank you guys online for choosing to understand the life story of the Buddha. I appreciate your interest in understanding his teachings. If you guys would like to learn more, there's opportunities for you to do that. All next week, I'm going to be teaching a course from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Tomorrow, I'm going to be teaching his core central teaching of the Eightfold Path, where I'm going to be teaching the Four Noble Truths, which is his very first teaching. And then I'm going to teach all the connected teachings as part of the Eightfold Path. And I'm going to be using his original words to be able to help you see this. And sometimes people are like, well, yeah, of course, what else would you teach with but his original words? It's not so common that people actually teach based on his original words. So I'm going to show you his original words on all of these teachings, and then I'm going to explain it to you to help you understand how to integrate this into your life and experience the real results. And there's multiple topics all throughout the week, where each day of the week it's going to be a different topic. So if you would like to come, you're welcome to come. Like you heard, everything's available at no cost. You can attend here or you can attend online, because we live stream everything, and you can even watch the recordings if you can't attend live. So you'll find these details on our bulletin board over there. You'll also find it on our website. You can find it there, and you can even come talk to me, and I'll help you guys get plugged into what it is that you need in order to learn and understand the teachings of the Buddha. Because life is no fun in this unenlightened state. It's much, much better when you're experiencing the peace and the joy of the enlightened mental state. So whatever you choose to do today, have a very lovely and wonderful rest of your day. We'll see you next time. Take care. Sawadee ka. Thank you again for watching. Enjoy your meditation. Look forward to seeing you online and answering any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.